I think as a society, the more compassion we can bring to ourselves, the more we're able to bring it to other people. All the roots of that behavior was from the trauma that I experienced as a little girl.
Welcome to our 8th podcast for Mac and Chat. Today we are delighted to welcome Fritzi Horstman. She's the founder and executive director of the Compassion Prison Project. She believes it is urgent to bring humanity and compassion to those living behind bars, and these acts will help transform our society. So we hope you enjoy listening to her today. Welcome, Fritzi. I'm absolutely delighted to have you on our podcast, our little podcast as it is. I know I've been chasing you for a while to do this, so it's great that you're free to do that today. So welcome and thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. It's so good to be here. It's really about the trauma. It's once we realize that people in prison are traumatized and we reflect on our own trauma, we're able to bring a more compassion to ourselves and to the other people that are living in prison. And I think as a society, the more compassion we can bring to ourselves, the more we're able to bring it to other people. And I think we're bringing in a new brain for our collect. I know it sounds weird, but I've been thinking about this, and it's the idea of a collective brain that we've been in fight or flight for so long. We've all been in such a survival state, and now we're realizing we need to move from this animal state to a more generous and compassionate part of our brain, which is the cortex. But I think society together is moving into the cortex. Just you wanting to have this conversation is evidence of your participation in this evolution that we're going through.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that struck me the most when I first saw you, which was a good few years ago, I think you were speaking in Glasgow, and then I saw you speaking in Belfast, was the statement that prisons are trauma warehouses. And that just really resonated with me, that we need to change the way we think about prisons rather than how we think about them at the moment, in that they're housing so many of our broken people in the world, and they end up in these places because of what's happened to them. What struck me about that was me as a counsellor who works with people who are traumatised, not actually thinking about someone who's in the prison system, how they've ended up there. And that really got me interested in understanding about trauma and why people end up in prison as a result of what's happened to them, and how we're treating them as a society and how that needs to change. So that really struck and resonated with me all those years ago when I first heard you speaking.
Yeah, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who was the former Surgeon General of California, she says prisons are an ICU for trauma. And a lot of people push back. They're saying, well, we're not taking care of them. And that's exactly the point. I think we do need to treat prisons as a place where we can help heal the trauma. And I've been to 3 prisons in Scotland. And one of the things I noticed is most of the prisons there are isolating the men and women much longer than is healthy for their brains. Isolation is one of the worst things for any person's brains. And one of the reasons people are committing crimes is because they weren't getting the right dose of connection to their parents and to their communities. So we're basically mirroring the situation that got our dear incarcerated brothers and sisters into prisons in the first place. And trauma is this legacy of trauma. In our surveys, 98% of the people that are in prison, and I would argue it's really 100%, have had at least one traumatic event in their lives. And it just takes one traumatic event to change a child's brain, to change a young person's brain, to change our brains. We get into a car accident, and now we don't want to drive a car anymore, right? The brain is geared towards safety and to staying alive. But that's a fight or flight survival response. And we've got to help people learn how to regulate themselves. But it's not just people in prison. I believe most of us have committed some kind of crime. Most of us have been, cruel to our children. I have traumatized my child. I have traumatized my husband. My family traumatized me. I traumatized my family. There's so much accountability that needs to happen about what we've done to each other and to ourselves. And once we get into that state of it's what I call the algorithm for transformation. When we can become vulnerable with ourselves, when we can face up to what we've done and who we've been, knowing that this is not who we truly are. We are magnificent beings, right? We are, just the fact that we're alive is a miracle. And we forget that. We think this is part of the deal. We're just here. But no, this is a miracle. We have to look at that. Every flower that emerges is a miracle. So fundamentally, we are divine humans, right? We must know what trauma does so we can fix it. Well, not fix it, but heal it. And once we're aware of what trauma does to our brains, we can stop this madness that we've all been a party to.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think trauma is a cycle, as you talked about. There's generational. In Glasgow in particular, we look at certain areas of Glasgow and you can see the cycle. You can see the pattern. Parents, alcoholics, drug addicts, so they've got to feed that habit. They steal, kids learn that. And the cycle continues. And it's really about trying to break that cycle. And I know that you're trying that in the prison services and talking to prisoners so that they can break the cycle in their own families, but trying to get that broken before they get to ending up being imprisoned, because that's the ultimate issue. Is they're traumatized. They do something to fix that feeling that they've got, whether it's stealing or drug addiction or whatever it is, and then they end up in prison and they're traumatized even further because they're then isolated from everything they know and their connections gone. I've worked with clients who have been drug addicts and drug dealers, and they'll come into the counselling room and they're some of the most beautiful, precious people I've ever seen and spoken to. And they're telling me that these heartbreaking stories that have happened to them and how they've ended up selling drugs because it's a way of life and it's just normal for them, who are committing crimes to survive, and we in society see a lot of judgment on that. I wanted to just take a wee step back just to kind of ask you what inspired you to create the Compassionate Prison Project, because obviously I know that you're doing that, but I kind of wanted to understand a wee bit about, what was your journey that led you to this and setting it up in the first instance?
Sure. And I want to get back to the whole violence as a solution thing that you just brought up, and poverty being something that we have created collectively. We have created this situation. So the people that are resorting to crimes are resorting to something that we're actually guilty of. We're part of poverty.
Yeah, we're enabling.
Exactly. Well, we've enabled it. We've created it, even if not directly, even if we're not the people that have colonized or whatever that legacy of poverty and trauma is. We are continuing it. So we are voting these things in. We are not addressing these things. We all know the neighborhoods that need help. We all know where we need to put our money in to help these people, our people. And so until we figure that out, until we become agents of change and compassion, crime is going to be part of our lives, because crime is a solution for people who don't know who don't have the resources and wherewithal to rise above it. And so when violence is a solution, which if you look at our society, violence is a solution everywhere we look. We go to war, we arrest people, we put people in boxes. These are all violent.
Yeah.
These are all violent acts. So until we decide that we are going to resolve this issue, this poverty issue, then we're still part of the problem. So the other thing, so how I got started. So this is my own journey about learning about trauma. I learned I was traumatized at 56 years old. I read a book, The Body Keeps the Score. And my violence, the way I treated my son, the way I dealt with my husband, my friends, my reactivity, my blaming everybody. This is all the roots of that behavior was from the trauma that I experienced as a little girl. And when I realized that, it was, the light bulbs, a lot of light bulbs flashed for me that this is not who I am. I'm not a bad person. I'm not really a violent person.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned that violence was the way to protect myself and to get what I wanted.
What was it that made you read that book in the first one?
Well, my dear friend Seth, who's a clinician, I was having coffee with him, and for some reason, I told him that my mother had hit me, that my mother had, humiliated me, had shamed me, that my father was an alcoholic, and so right there, those are three adverse childhood experiences right there in that conversation. Domestic violence happened in my family, and then, my mother had mental illness. All these things that I didn't really understand. All this violence that my little body was exposed to as a little girl contributed to my behavior in adulthood. And, getting that information, getting that epiphany that this is not who you are, that's a fundamental, that is a basic revelation that you are not a bad person. And, the shame that I had about myself, my shadow, I had a big shadow, just this remorse of how I terrorized my little boy. I mean, that's probably my biggest crime in my life, is terrorizing my little boy. And I'm still dealing with the repercussions of what I did to him as a little child. But there, once you realize if violence is a solution in your life, you can make changes, and so it's not just violence to other people, it's violence to yourself, right? I was bulimic, I was drinking. I had a glass of wine every night because I didn't know how to deal with this anxiety and self-loathing that I had in myself. But this is all unconscious. This is all in the background. This is all not on the surface saying, wait a second, you can deal with this. You can figure this out. And then I started figuring it out. And so when I went into prison, everybody had this belief, this unconscious belief that they're not worthy. And it's reinforced by the state, by the officers, by other people that are in the prisons, because they feel like crap. So they're going to make other people feel like crap. Another trauma response. Prisons are just this traumatic vortex that people are thrown into, officers, staff, and incarcerated people. And when it's reinforced, when trauma is reinforced, trauma is a virus. And until we stop the spread, we keep reinfecting each other. And so we need to really get this into the mainstream conversation that trauma doesn't work. Trauma is not our solution. Violence is not our solution.
What is interesting to me is one conversation with your friend set off a series of actions that you then took, which then led you to a greater consciousness of your own understanding of yourself and why you were doing what you were doing.
Yes, and it was a conversation of vulnerability, right? I told him about my deepest, darkest secrets. I mean, these are deep secrets. You don't want anybody to know your father's an alcoholic. You don't want anybody to know your mother was nuts sometimes. She was also fantastic, though. She was also a bright light, but that light was all constantly being overshadowed by her trauma and her negative feelings about herself. She was adopted, and she was put up for adoption by a 16-year-old by my grandmother. And I never met my grandmother, but the shame of being adopted, just that the original sin that she carried around with herself, just that she wasn't wanted, and that thought, that very damaging, injurious thought that she walked around the world with, that nobody wants me, right? That gave her permission to be violent. Well, it was a violent thought, right? Nobody wants me. It's a very violent thought to yourself. But when you have those thoughts, It allows for violence. And she was a smoker, so that was violence that gave her relief. Addiction is violence to self. Suicide is violence to self. But when you abuse other people, that's also violence to self. There's nobody, you're not going to get away with anything when you traumatize other people because it goes to yourself. And we all know this in our criminal justice systems, that what we're doing to people is not what we should be doing. We know this. We know this collectively throughout the world, that prisons are not our solution, because it is violence as a solution. We know on a fundamental way that treating people badly doesn't work. We know this. And so now it's just time. No blame. No, we're not going to blame anybody for anything. The past is over. We cannot go back to the past, but we in this present moment can create a new future. And that's why these conversations need to happen. And that's why these risks, because the thing is, people are afraid of the unknown. When a traumatized society does not want to move forward into an unknown, because that's freaky to them. Taking risks is scary to traumatized people. So when we move out into the unknown, what if it doesn't work? What if somebody gets hurt? Well, I will tell you this right now. You keep treating people the way we're treating them in prison, you are at risk of hurting people more than if you treat them kindly with compassion. Open the doors of your heart and of our society for help. People who are traumatized hurt people as a solution. If you show them other ways, first off, by being kind to them, by telling them that they matter and that they have a purpose in this world, which they do. If you ask me, the people in prison have the resource, have the answers on how we can change these societies. But we have to give them a voice. So have to give them the healing tools that they need so that they can go back home and say, hey man, I know what you're doing. This isn't working. Let's, come and let's have a talk. I'd say let's have a smoke. Let's have a drink. Let's do something. Let's get you out of this state so that you can start exploring other ways to take care of yourself. But these conversations have to happen. And, people that commit crimes are warriors, right? They're figuring out a way to get something done. But you give them the tools to figure out a way to change the world, they're going to do that. But you have to give them tools, and you have to give an opportunity, and you cannot isolate them for 23 hours or whatever it is, 18 hours in their cells. They need our brains. We're social creatures. We're created we need serve and return from each other. We need, when I talked with my friend about what happened to me as a child, he was there and his brain was lighting up in the same way my brain was lighting up. And I got to feel that compassion. I got to feel that generosity from him. And then he gave me solutions. He gave me some solutions. Read The Body Keeps the Score. That'll give you a huge, that was like, that book changed my life. It's changing the lives of thousands of people right now, because we're in thousands of prisons right now, not thousands of people, we're reaching thousands of people. Our curriculum is about to be in 600, in the tablets of 600,000 people in the United States. We have the chance to let 600,000 people know that live in prison, that they're not bad people, that they can heal, they can remember who they truly are, and they can change their lives. It's incredible. It's incredible what 5 years in an idea can do. And, we're just getting started. When Scotland lets me back, I was in Belfast again recently at the Action Trauma Summit. We wanted to visit some prisons again in Scotland just to check in with them. And they said no this time. When they let us back in, when they let this work of trauma back in. And I just think people are afraid to take risks, but we have to, we can dip our toes in the water, and we can do little things to make us feel safe along the way. And that's how we heal trauma. We don't just talk about everything that happened to us at once. We take little bits and say, this is what happened. And then we don't talk about anything else, and we work on that. so that, you know that as a therapist, you can't metabolize trauma in one sitting or even 1 year, maybe. I'm still healing. I'm still got big things to heal.
It's interesting that when you came back to Scotland, the answer was no when you'd been given access before. And I wonder what it was that frightened them, because it's fear that stopped them from letting you back in again, as far as I can see. And then they'll put a whole load of rules and regulations in front of you as well to say these are all the reasons why not. But I wonder what that fear is by educating your prisoners, educating them and helping them understand themselves. Surely that could only be a positive outcome as opposed to what they might think. And that's what's kind of worrying about that, isn't it? That when you actually have the opportunity to speak to people, tell them about what's happened to them, as you say, the light bulb goes off and change happens.
Well, and I don't know if there was, maybe maybe someone got dysregulated, maybe someone got violent. I don't know what happened, if anything happened. Or if the clinicians got involved and said, no, we cannot do trauma. And the thing is, it's not trauma. This is not a trauma session. It's trauma awareness. Just like, it's basically the body keeps the score. It's basically giving them material so that they can start investigating their own lives. Because, it's an uninvestigated life. I forgot what the quote is, but we need to, as humans, we need to understand the mechanics of trauma. This is a breakthrough. This only happened, Bessel's book came out in 1994, but this is a breakthrough in the way we see ourselves and the way we see each other. And that's why I'm so passionate about the people in prison, because what I see on a daily basis, letters I receive every day, are people who have done horrible, horrible crimes, who have, they've come to themselves. They say, what I did was not okay. That is not acceptable. How can I heal this? How can I give back? We cannot bring back people that they've killed. We cannot undo the trauma that they've created, but they want a chance to redeem themselves. And I think that we as a society need to create that pathway, because I created crimes too. I traumatized my son. I am still working on making amends with that one. But I've also stolen from department stores, and I've sold drugs. So I've been a party to other people's addictions, right? So, I've been working on making amends, and I think everybody deserves that chance, and everybody deserves to be seen in their magnificence instead of their wretchedness, right? That's what prisons are. They amplify the wretched instead of amplifying the magnificent. Like a church, right? And you walk into a church and you might feel small, but you feel like you're part of something huge, which is, the glory of the world and the glory of God, whatever. I'm not going to get religious in here, but we all know that those buildings reflect a deep part of who we are. And, I don't think prisons need to be churches, but they can be healing centers, and to reflect the magnificence of who we truly are. And we all know that, like you say, your clients, they are spectacular humans. So let's be curious about that. Let's investigate who indeed is sitting in these cells. Besides the fact that they've robbed a convenience store, or they've beaten their wife, right? Whatever happened, what else is in there? It's not just that one thing. And that's just the past. They may not beat their wife again, right? We don't want this violence to keep going, but it is incumbent upon us to help people heal and give them the resources that they need. And that's what we're doing at Compassion Prison Projects with Trauma Talks, our curriculum. And, we make this available to every prison that will have it, and whether they can pay for it or not. And we're actually working with Cisco to bring Trauma Talks to the community as well. Cisco, which is Natalie Logan, and I think James Doherty.
Doherty, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes,
yeah. James Doherty, yeah.
Yeah, so we're making our material available to them, and so Scotland, take me up on it. Let's go. what happened to people in Scotland, that the colonialism that is in their ancestry, the trauma is in their ancestry. And until we really face that, and we face, what that trauma has done through the ages, and I don't think it's just the poor people. I think it's, from what I could see, trauma. There's a trauma everywhere in Scotland, and we've got to come to grips of what the violence that was done to so many people for so long, for an extended time, and even in the way the government is set up, there's violence. Even the way they yell at each other in Parliament, that's a violent act, right?
I mean, Scotland is a fighting, fiercely proud nation in so many ways, but it's also a divided land at times. In Glasgow, we've got the whole Celtic Rangers divide, football, which is sectarian, and that can be quite evident at times when you hear the way people speak and who do you support and what colours do you wear and things like that. So there's always that element of tension that goes on around in Glasgow. But yeah, Glasgow is also some of the most beautiful, wonderful, generous, kind people I've ever come across. So we are a whole mix. And I think something you said earlier there about going into an environment like a church, for example, actually one of the warmest and most enjoyable experience I've ever had is my husband's in AA, and he's been sober for 26 years, which is wonderful. And he's invited me along to sometime go along to some of the meetings in AA. And I honestly have had some of the best experiences in AA because of the warmth that you receive when you walk through the door. You meet a lawyer, you meet somebody that cleans the floors, you meet a doctor, you meet someone that drives a lorry. It's all walks of life. And all of that just gets left at the door. They're just all in that meeting, sharing their experiences and collectively trying to help each other. And for me, that's a wonderful experience to see. And I've often said to people, go to an AA meeting. You'll hear trauma, you'll hear deprivation, you'll hear all sorts that come from all walks of life. And that's a great way to understand that it can affect everybody. Addiction also affects so many people. But addiction is caused generally because of trauma.
We suffer in isolation. Trauma separate and community heals, right? So AA is
exactly.
These are great institutions, but I want to get back. I want to go back for a second to the Rangers and the Celtics thing, because this divide. It's basic. I think you say it's non-secular, but it's
just Protestant Catholic. There's a big Protestant Catholic divide in the city. Yeah.
Yes, and so here's the thing: what trauma does. Trauma wants us to feel better about ourselves, because if you're traumatized, which let's just argue for argument's sake, 80% of the people in Scotland have some kind of trauma, right? Just for argument's sake, right? So they're feeling bad about themselves. They've yelled at their son, right? Or someone has called them a name or whatever it is, or they're drinking, right? So they feel bad about their alcoholism or their addiction, or they're using drugs, right? So there's some underlying malaise that they're feeling, something that doesn't feel good about. They don't feel good about themselves for some reason. Look, I'm dealing with this my son right now, and really trying to figure out how I can help heal my son for what I've done to him. Anyway, so I have this malaise in me, right? When you're traumatized and you're not aware of it, the instinct is to blame somebody, is to find somebody who's responsible for your pain. And we're seeing it in the United States with the Democrats and Republicans, right? So we want to prevail. We want to feel good about ourselves. So we're going to find somebody to take it out on. We're going to find someone to focus our rage on. The rage that really is our own self-loathing, which isn't it. It's just trauma, right? So this self-loathing needs to go somewhere. A lot of people kill themselves or take drugs, right? So that's one solution. But another is rage and to hate somebody else, to blame somebody else for, or to look at them and say, at least I'm not a Celtic, or at least I'm not a Ranger, right? Or at least I'm not a Republican, or at least I'm not a Democrat. So this rage gets displaced. This self-loathing gets displaced and projected onto somebody else. And this is the same thing is happening in Northern Ireland. I just, I could see the the self-hatred needing a place to go. And so when we start saying, you know what, I'm going to take this self-hatred and realize I'm not a bad person. I'm traumatized, man. My mother, personally, my mother used to tell me I was a whore, right? So what 16-year-old girl is going to have a good sense of herself when her mother's called her a whore, right? So, and I took my rage and I put it on my, right? That was my solution. Unconscious though. So this is all unconscious. So I'm not blaming anybody for being angry at a Ranger or a Celtic, but I want them to understand that when we see, I think they're called hooligans. Is that what we, when we see that the violence that erupts from however it gets put out into the world, this is just rage from not feeling good enough. And my message to everybody in Scotland and in the world is that's bullwhack. You are good enough. You are spectacular. And let's put our energies, instead of putting our energies out against somebody, some mythic creation, the Rangers, or mythic creation, the Celtics. Let's take that energy and start working on ourselves. Let's say, hey, man, I'm not really angry at them. I'm angry at the way I was treated. I'm angry at not being seen for the great way I draw, or the great way the great way I tell jokes, or whatever contribution you have, which is vital to this whole organism we call Earth. Each person, I believe, has a crucial part to play in this reclaiming of who we truly are. One of my mentors, his name is Phil Stutz. He wrote 3 books, and he's on Netflix called Stutz. There's a film called Stutz, but he says that we find our purpose and we find our sense of self through each other, through need. And he says, imagine a lattice or a tic-tac-toe board. At the intersection of each point, where the two lines cross, is where we find each other, and we find that we need each other. And trauma separates, right? So that instinct to isolate and to separate and to demonize somebody else, that instinct is a trauma response. But when we get to our cortex, we get to the place of who we truly are, we realize we do need each other, and that we need to ask for help. And we don't have to do it on our own. That's such a trauma response, is screw it. I want to say, F it. I don't need anybody else. I'll just do it myself. And I go to that a lot when I get triggered by my family. The other day I told my son, maybe you should start paying rent, right? I was in a trauma response, and I just lashed out at him, and it really hurt him. And so, this is my project right now, is finding ways to help co-regulate my son and help regulate him so he doesn't trigger me, and so that we don't go off the handle. And that's work, but I see it. I can see that it's happening. I can see it. But this is from 5 years of learning about trauma, and this is for everybody. We can all learn how to be better people, and I think that truly that's what we want. And we can end hooliganism. We can end this division, and sports are great, and having competition is great. But the violence the undercurrent of violence needs to be brought to the surface, and say, you know what? I really like sparring with you, Celtics or Rangers. I really like this. I love this competition. And it brings out the best in both sides, right? The excellence of the sports, which men need, by the way. Men need this. They need to feel part of something, and they need, that aggression and that testosterone. This is, this healthy competition is the greatest thing that was ever invented, because it's not war, right? But I'm reading this book right now, and I'm going to have him on my podcast. His name is Michael Gurian, and he wrote a book called The Wonder of Boys. And he talked about how up until the 50s in the United States, most of the men, as young men, went into the military. So they had this structure of going, of channeling their violence and their aggression and their competition into the military and for some war. But now that we don't have that structure, what has happened for these impoverished communities, gangs have formed, because if men need a purpose, men need a purpose for their lives, and they need a community for their lives. They need a tribe, and they will, like the Lord of the Flies, they will create this negatively or positively. So sports are a great solution in our society for young men, and giving them a sense. And so, as you talked about, we need to figure this out in the communities. Sports for the young men.
Yeah, I think young men and male psyche, as you say, is that connected mentality of like rugby is a big thing and football's a big thing. My son, he went to a school where his friends were predominantly one football team supporter, and he chose to support this other team. And he was quite young when he did it. And I remember asking him, like, why did you choose that team? He went, because they're the better team, Mum. And I was, it was such an innocent, lovely response, but all through his life, he's grown up with all of his friends supporting one team and he supports the other team. And to this day, he'll go and watch the game and he'll be the one lone person sitting watching the football. And he's managed that, successfully managed that. I think that's because I said a lot to him when he was younger. Don't be a sheep, think for yourself. Don't be a sheep, think for yourself. So he certainly does. And he's put up with the challenge that's come with it, where everybody supports one team and he supports the other. So he doesn't see the fight that goes on. He's aware of it now, but he likes the football team.
Yes, but is the team better, do you think? Do you think he's right?
No. No. It's Rangers and Celtic. It's probably one of the most boring football leagues in my opinion, because it's only ever Rangers or Celtic that win the league. All the other teams, try as they can to get there, but they don't. It's all the money goes to Celtic and Rangers, so that's the league. I prefer rugby. I think rugby's a much better game to watch. It's a hooligans game played by gentlemen, and football's or as you call it, soccer over there, is a gentleman's game played by hooligans. So that's the definitions of them.
Nevertheless, it can be and it should be a really positive expression of the warrior male, which is basically every single man in the world needs purpose and needs purpose and drive and a place to put all this aggression. And so, if you want to end drug abuse, we need to get every single impoverished neighborhood needs a boxing gym or a football league or two leagues so that everybody can play against each other positively, right? This needs to be a priority. I think, and I'll be talking with Michael Gurian this week. So, I want his ideas on how we can start making our world a better place, channeling that male aggression, which, it's the thing that has built those cathedrals, right? This ability. He says that men think spatially. Men have a way of, they like the ball in space, the soccer ball in space. That's how they think, and that's how their body works. Like women are more verbal, more language. We have our brains, both sides of our brains talk to each other much faster. So we need to emphasize the men's strengths and encourage them. And I know, all I ever see are in the poor communities that I've been observing, the leaders really guide the youth to sports. And that's what needs to happen, in a bigger way.
I think in Scotland and in particular, men are not used to talking about their feelings at all. The number of male clients I've had come in and I've said to them, so how do you feel about that? And they go, what do you mean? How are you feeling? I don't understand the question. Literally they'll answer like that. And we had a guy on our podcast a few months ago, and he was into addiction and really struggling. And they've set up this group called Keep the Heed. So Keep the Heed is keep the head. Heed is Scottish for head. It's a play on words. So Keep the Heed. And he and his friend just basically said, we didn't have anywhere to talk about how we were feeling and why we were doing what we were doing. And this small group's now grown, and they're now going into the prison services and going in and talking and setting up groups. And Shotts Prison was one of the prisons that they're going along to do. So, it's small acorns, but it's interesting how when one man makes himself vulnerable, and it gives permission to the other man to be vulnerable, and before we know it, we're able to connect and share at a level that is not, how did you see the football last night? Do you want to go for a drink? It's actually, they're actually talking at a level where they actually can connect at an emotional level. And that group has gone from strength to strength, Yeah. And that is what I think we need more of.
It's crucial. It's men being vulnerable, and it's not their, just like we were saying, talking about things is not what men do. They don't even know how they feel sometimes. They have a feeling, they're angry or whatever, but they don't even know why. Their brain doesn't process emotion as quickly as women do. And it I'm kind of just understanding this now, and I'm always startled, like, why does my son need to go into his room when he gets angry instead of, why can't he just tell me about it and we can talk about it? It's like, no, he's got a different saying. So, but when men are able, because men understand, they understand their brain. My husband understands my son. He's like, you need to give him space, whatever. All this is very new to me.
The young man's mind is a challenge for sure to try and understand it. I've got a 22-year-old son, so I know what that's like and the challenges that brings. And I think also understanding how they process information. If you're in an internal processor, you verbally process, Fritzi. I hear you verbally processing as you're talking, but there's other people who'll internalize. And so how do you feel? I'll have to think about that because I don't really know how to answer it, but I could probably ask you that question and very quickly we would be able to figure out how you were feeling at the time. And so that processing is also a stumbling block when people don't understand, how to actually talk about my feelings, how to actually talk about what's going on for me. I get stuck when I'm asked a question like your son goes into the room and has to process his anger in a different way to the way you would process your anger, and it's quite interesting when we start to work with people to help them again acknowledge this is how you deal with it. You're no different to that. You just have a different style of processing to this person. That's okay.
But to recognize that this is not something wrong with you. This is just something that this is how you go through the world, and we need to have compassion for that brain, because like as a woman, I'm like, why can't you get that? But I have to bring out my compassion and say, they process information differently than I do. And my son can do calculus in 20 seconds. And I'm like, I can't get that. So, our strengths, we need to encourage our individual strengths and our gender strengths. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, but to really, dial down on what a young man needs, what a young boy needs. He needs to feel part of a tribe. The other thing Michael Gurian talks about is having 3 different families. We have the original family, but then we need the family like at school. That's a family. That's a family that looks out for our children, or daycare, or our children need 3 families is what he says. And the third one is, the institutions. I guess school is the third one. But more like mentors and people who will look out for our kids. We're not there. And we've become more isolated, that the children don't have other ways of getting parenting. And especially a young boy needs discipline. He needs to know that what he's doing he's on the right path, or if he needs correction. And especially with that anger and rage and competition that's in the male body, that needs to be funneled in better by a male as possible, because a man understands, just like what I'm seeing with my husband and my son. And so the other thing to look at, like in the United States, I think it's 80% of the people in prison grew up with a single mother, right? So she didn't know, woman doesn't instinctually know what it is to be a male, and doesn't know how to give a male the right information for him to grow better, to grow more connected and part of society, right? Be pro-social.
And emotionally developed that as well,
Exactly. And
where does their emotional growth come from? Yeah.
Exactly. And then you have young fathers, 16-year-old fathers that have been grown up by a single mother, who don't have good male mentorship, right? So this cycle continues. So, we need to, as a society, interrupt these patterns. And a lot of men don't want the baby, or a lot of men, have three babies, three baby mamas, as they call them here. So we have to really support the man in the places where he's at too, instead of demonizing him. And I don't really know what I'm saying here, but both sides, everybody needs support here, and not to be demonized for having sex and creating another baby here.
Yeah, and the babies are generally created as a way to find love, to fill that need in them that they haven't had met somewhere else. So we have a lot of young mums that have babies as a way to kind of find that love that they're looking for, and then are hugely uneducated and unable to bring that child into the world with giving it all it needs, and then we're back into patterns of behavior again. And then that child has a baby early, and on it goes. I also think one of the things that's quite interesting, I think Gabor talked about when go and see Indigenous tribes and things like that families are all together, and there's the phrase it takes a village to raise a child, and I think that community has broken down an awful lot as well in our world. Especially in this part of the world, community used to be quite a big thing. People would maybe go to the churches, or all the women would do the washing together, and what was called the steamy, which was the wash houses out the back of the tenement flats, apartments. They would go in, and people would resolve all their problems because they'd be talking while they were doing it. All of that's broken down, and families are all over the place now. So the community aspect has gone as well. So I think that's something that as a society we could work on better as well.
Absolutely. And they say when a grandmother or grandparents live close to the newborn, their grandchildren, their life expectancy actually increases. So it's actually it's like built into our DNA that we are connected to, not only to our children, but to our children's children and our children's children's children, right? Because this gives us, it gives the grandparents a sense of purpose, and a chance to correct all the mistakes they made on the first one.
I know, that's why I keep thinking, if I become a mum, a grandmum, I'll be so happy to sort out all that stuff that I didn't do well as a mum.
No,
I'll be a great grandmother with my kids looking at me going, "You didn't do that for us as a mum," But I think you're right. It's an important part of a healthy development of a child, is having that close knit around them.
Yes, and it's helping everybody, right? So connection and family is such an important piece, and it's but the thing about dysfunctional families, which I grew up in, that's not good for you either. So it's this awareness, and I just can't emphasize enough, if for your listeners, for those of you that have had a traumatic childhood, and I'm just going to go through the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, really quickly. So as your listeners hear them, and they hear something that they experienced as a child, maybe they can start understanding that this is why your brain is now more predisposed to fight or flight, or more reactive, or more kind of cranky. I think trauma is created a cranky nation. We're all cranky. I see a mother on the bus. I was in Northern Ireland. I saw a mother on the bus, and she had 3 kids, and I could tell she didn't have a lot of money, but she was cranky. And so a child growing up with a cranky mom, it doesn't feel safe. That's not a safe place for this. And her little kid, she had a little redheaded kid on a little bike, and you could just see he was just a little rascal, just so adorable. But she wasn't getting the wonder of this kid because she had to deal with him. And that's why mothers need a break. Help those mothers, please. Somebody go over there and say, can I watch your kids for a couple hours so you can go just take a walk? Because, mothers need a break. But we got to if we're feeling cranky, if you've been cranky, just know that this could have something to do with trauma. If you're waking up cranky every day, you got some work to do. And, I woke up cranky all the time, and I was blaming everybody. And blame is another one. You're living in the past. Look what they did to me. And then you're a victim. And then how are you going to change your life? How are you going to make your life better if you're waiting for somebody to say, I'm sorry? Because they're not going to, right? So let's get back on with our lives. And don't blame them. They're just doing the best they can. And they made a mistake, just like you did. We're all, everybody, if we all just cop to all the stuff that we've done, we can have a clean slate, but we can just make a clean slate in our minds today. And let's get on with it, because we've got a new world to build. If you ask me, it's on everybody. Getting these impoverished neighborhoods up to snuff. We need to raise all those people so that they're in better shape, so that they're not committing crimes. When somebody is stealing from somebody else, this is a result of us not doing our part. It's like they talk about San Francisco and people just going and stealing things all the time. That's because we haven't taken care of our people. These are our people. Everybody in this society is our people. This is us. We're talking about us. We're not talking about them. When we say them, we've made a division. We've dehumanized somebody else. And that's just a trauma response. So no shame, but start looking at that. Like, why do you need to feel better? Like, oh, those poor people, we're better than them. But you know what? We created that. So are we really better? So but it's not about blame. I'm not going to blame anybody here. All I'm saying is we can see what needs to happen. Let's take a step and do our part. Doing our part, even just babysitting for a mother who's out of her mind, is doing your part. All these things, all these little micro compassions that we can put into the world, it changes everything.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Compassion's the biggest word that I use in my therapy room. And I think the other side of that is that when you start to understand yourself better and you start to get yourself better, then the best way of healing yourself is to help others and to do more for others. So, that's another thing in the AA program, the 12th step. Once you're through the steps, your job then is to pass on the message to somebody else and help somebody else and come alongside them. And, if we could have a society that thought in that way and behaved in that way, it would be absolutely wonderful. But unfortunately, not everybody thinks that they need to do that and they don't need to change. And hopefully someone is listening to this podcast and going, you know what, that resonates with me. Maybe I need to start doing something, change something in my life, and that for me is a powerful, if it helps one person, then this podcast has been definitely worth it as far as I'm concerned. We've only got a couple of minutes left, Fritzi. You were going to talk about the ACEs. Did you want to do that?
Sure, but I just want to say one thing about what you just said. The society that we are dreaming about, that we all want in our lives, is in our power, and our healing is dependent on us giving back to each other. And so, what we want the most, it's like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. We have that power in us, and it's there, and it's just giving back to each other and helping each other. And I see it every day, every time I walk into a prison and I do the work with these men and these women, and I see their eyes light up that they are not bad people. It's changing everything. It is my donation to the world is helping other people. And this is, I am not one little special thing. I'm special like everybody else is special. I'm not any more special. I just, I just have this way of seeing something and saying, I got to do something. I'm one of those action takers, but we can all be action takers. And it's those we actually matter, and we actually will change the world when we decide that we've had enough of the way it is, of just coming home, sitting on the couch and watching television, instead of, hey, let's invite them over. I know they're having a hard time, and let's make them a meal. Whatever it is, we know what needs to be done. Like, I knew about the prison system, something had to change. I knew that 10 years before I walked into a prison. And so we all, we know how, we have the tools, and we have the insight, and we have the knowledge of how to transform our world. And so it's just really about us all. It's all us, when in the Amish, and they're all helping each other build a barn. Well, let's help everybody build their own barn. And, and then we have this, abundant, thriving community. Sorry about my dog.
He wants to help.
He does his part. So the 10 ACEs: physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, parents divorced or separated, domestic violence, parents or caregiver addicted to drugs or alcohol, parents or caregiver mentally ill, suicidal, or depressed, and a household member going to prison. And of those 10, I have 8 of them. But the reason I'm not in prison is because when I left the house, I was safe. I lived in a safe neighborhood. I went to a safe school. So I had people in my life where I could relax, where I could just be, I could figure out who I was half the time. I was a juvenile delinquent, though, and if this was nowadays, I might have actually gone to a juvenile facility for shoplifting, for dealing drugs, for stealing from my school. So my shenanigans, and that's one of the reasons I can walk into a prison and say, hey, I know about trauma, and I know about shenanigans, because I've done them too. And so when I do that, I'll we get into small groups and we find out what we have in common. I'm like saying, has everybody here sold drugs? And then they'll look at me like, you sold drugs, Fritzi? And it's like, yes, I actually know. I know what it's like to hurt another person through my own selfishness. And so, yes, I'm accountable for that. I mean, I wasn't a big time drug dealer. Don't get me, it was just little bits, but I still did it, right? But I didn't have traumatic brain injury. I didn't live in foster. I didn't have experience with foster care, the juvenile justice system, or live in a dangerous neighborhood. I didn't have people judging me on my religion or my maybe gender, but not so much, right? But all these things add up into the body. African Americans in the United States are criticized just for having a black skin, right? So they're criticized. There's something wrong with them, just the way they came out. I mean, that's just to me, that's just incredibly horrible. But all of these things, again, what we've done to African Americans in the United States is the sense that we're not enough. So we're going to have a scapegoat to make us feel better about ourselves. At least I'm not him, right? Well, no. When we make him part of our family and we bring him into a world of abundance and positivity, that everything changes, and you don't feel bad about yourself anymore, right? Because you're now repairing the harms that we are dragging into this year, this century. So the healing is on us, and it's each one of us. Each one of us can do our part. And even if it's just saying I'm sorry to somebody that you've held a grudge on for 20 years, right? Who are you to have that grudge? To me, that's arrogance, right? That we are keeping this person in a prison, in a mental prison, for something they did 20 years ago. Come on, we got to move. We got to move. We got to change this world. And these resentments and blame do not serve us anymore, and they keep us in a victim state. And the victim state doesn't have to move. The victim state can just say, look what he did to me. I can't do anything. And so now, to hell with that. I say, let's go. Say you're sorry, ask for forgiveness, or just say, hey, can you apologize? Because I'm still hurt. Just being vulnerable. And if they say to hell with you, you did your part, right? Change this, because this energy is like a big fog. That fog you can't walk through. Well, the fog's going to lift now because we're going to realize that all this is just in the past, and the past doesn't exist, right? If you read The Power of Now, there is no future either. So all that worry about what's going to happen, why are you wasting your time on that? Take action. It's waste of energy, and it doesn't exist. Yes, maybe I'll lose a job, maybe I won't, but you don't know. So why aren't you just doing your best at your work right now? This is, in this present moment, is the only time we can change the world. And it's on all of us, every single one. You see a problem, you take action. You know what to do. And if you don't, it doesn't matter. Even if you fail, even if what you did didn't work, you got more information for the next action you're going to take and the next action. And just imagine every day taking 2 actions that'll change the world. What if we all did that? Calling up your friend and saying, I'm sorry. That's one action. Next action, asking that person if they need, £2 or whatever the lot of $2 so that they can get some food for their kids. Where the work is. So let's go. Let's go, Scotland. Come on. And stop with the hooliganisms. Stop with it is a great competition, the Celtics and the Rangers, but don't hate them. These are keeping you and all of your men engaged in something that they need. They need to channel this energy, but also that same energy build cathedrals. And so, Scotland, what is your next cathedral? Let's go. You can change this entire nation. It's a small nation, and you guys are I've met so many of you, and you are such great people. I can't understand what some of you say a lot, but I know how you are. And so, come on.
Fritzi, I could talk to you for another few hours, but unfortunately, our time today is up. I really appreciate your time and effort. And before you go, we ask all our guests to give us one. What would be the best piece of advice you've ever received? If you wanted to share that with us.
It's take action.
Take action.
To me, that is the best piece of advice, is because we sit there thinking about the greatness that's in us, the great possibility we have, but we think ourselves into inaction. And when I learned that action, no matter what you do, is the way you learn about yourself, is the wisdom that you get about yourself. And it's the only way that you're in forward motion. And even if we're so worried about a failure, that's a trauma response. We don't want to fail, so we tiptoe around our lives, and we're leaving the magnificence behind us instead of to heck with it. Let's go. Let's create that business, even if it fails. At least I did this. At least I figured it out. I'm not, 20 years from now saying, why didn't I do that? It's just like, get your community involved. We can do it. It's just like, let's build this barn together. We can do this. Build this cathedral. All of you know the next cathedral in Scotland. Let's go.
I took action when I reached out to you and asked you if you would do this. And when you do reach out to things that you think I might get rejected here, you know what? Sometimes great things happen. And I think today it's great things have happened in hearing you and your wisdom. And I truly thank you for it and for your time. And I hope you get everything resolved with your son and you have a peaceful resolution to all of that, because I know that's a challenging situation for you. But thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the work you do. And I hope your listeners, without hesitation, do something that will not only change their lives, but it'll change all of our lives. This is it. It's time now.